Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 14th chapter in the book of Proverbs. There are 35 verses to cover. There's no way we're going to make it through that in half an hour, so we divided it in half, and the way we arranged it was to cover verses 1 through 20. We'll save the final 15 or 16 for the successor lesson, but the reason we want to do that is because, as we'll learn when we get to it, beginning in verse 14, all the way to 20, they each cover a characteristic, a type of person, what they do, what will happen to them, what they can expect. We'll expound on that in further detail when we get to it. But in the preceding chapter, I did, because we have 20 verses to carry and not a whole lot of time to do it, we're going to minimize our customary preamble. We're just what we did since we've been dividing these in half and working on them a lot lately, is I expounded on the theme of wealth and poverty. He really only has, in the first half of the 13th chapter, and he really only has one thing to add to that in the final half, verse 18. Poverty and shame are for him who ignores discipline, but he who heeds reproof is esteemed. So Solomon's description of poverty is not universal. It's more complex, and it's an oversimplification to suggest that all who ignore discipline will be poor. But as a general positive principle, it is discipline is useful to acquiring wealth and success as we define it is the attainment of a worthy ideal, the progressive attainment of a worthy ideal. So it takes time, and you have to be disciplined and refined along the way to having success, which is not necessarily limited to wealth, but poverty and shame, the shame that comes with poverty. See, God neither magnifies affluence nor exalts poverty, shall we say. And that's reflective in Solomon's writings. And there's just two verses I want to cover before we cover the 20 and the actual official lesson itself, verses 20 and 21. He who walks with the wise shall be wise, but the companion of fools suffers evil. So to reduce it to a slogan, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. If you surround yourself with the presence and influence of wise people or foolish people, you're gonna be who you surround yourself with. Each person we interact with more extensively than others, and invariably and indelibly has a greater impact of influence on our character. And then we are warned in the next verse, evil pursues sinners, but a good is repaid to the righteous. Now the reason that evil pursues sinners is because sinners pursue evil, so they are trapped in a vicious cycle, and sin has a vicious side effects and trap and maze and web that it traps those who pursue their evil passions, that's what sinners do. So the opening verse of the chapter itself reads, every wise woman has built her house, but the foolish breaks it down with her hands. Now he's referring to a homemaker, not a woman who physically built their house, but builds the family. And this is this was basically the only career option. There was no professional opportunity for a lot of women in the ancient world, so they were expected, their duty was to tend to the welfare of the family, especially the children. So the house is the family. It's not a physical, literal house. And she does not literally or physically build it, but she does mold it and edify it and strengthen it and enrich the family if she does her duties properly. But the foolish breaks it down with her. So once more, this is a female, a woman, hands. So if you are foolish in your duties of being a wife and a mother, you can destroy what you should be creating and destroy what's already there. And foolishness leads to ruin is one of the common themes we read and reread throughout the book of Proverbs. Verse 2, he who walks in his straightness fears Yahweh, but he whose ways are crooked despises him. Now, every verse in the 13th chapter is arranged in what is known as an antithetical juxtaposition. At least one of this is where two opposite outlooks and outcomes are compared and contrasted. This is a standard format throughout the book of Proverbs. But just to get a sneak peek, verse 7 of chapter 14 does not conform to the antithetical format. So what we have in this one is one who fears Yahweh and one who despises him. Fear is a righteous response to a God who is all-loving yet perfectly capable of issuing wrathful retribution on his own creation, and rightly so. So fear in him is the fear which eliminates and expels all other fears. We will not fear man for what they can do to the flesh if our faith is sufficient and adequate, and so it's really he is sufficient, but the question is our faith in him sufficient enough to unlock that power? But he who ways are crooked, they are crooked because he despises Yahweh, and he who walks in straightness does so because he fears Yahweh. So we have that similar formula in the sentence structure. So to Yahweh, most people who don't believe in him, if you spend an extensive interviewing period with them, they will reveal the fact that they hate God, and you cannot hate anything if you don't believe in them. In the mouth of a fool is a rod of pride, but the lips of the wise guard them. So a rod is a weapon. It's an instrument used of, in the verse 24, we explained about child abuse and physical abuse and the whole modern child abuse, which is the assertive infiltration of the LGBT agenda into the elementary schools. You can type in the previous range. I think it's Corey Johnston, Proverbs 13 through 25, or more on that. But the mouth of a fool, now pride is a sin. It exalts the self and diminishes others, and more importantly, God. So the fool who is foolish, to be proud is to be foolish, because you'll have your priorities all out of whack. You will be a self-centered, self-oriented, and then the danger comes from the illusion of self-sufficiency. You think you made it all possible. So that's in the mouth is a weapon. Now words can be tools which can build houses and families, to take it to the earliest verse, or they can be weapons which maim and injure and destroy. But, then we hear the mouth, the lips. Now these are two physical organs through which language and speech spring, and the lips won't even open the mouth because they keep their pride and ego at least suppressed and on a lid. Where there are no oxen, the crib is clean, but from the strength of an ox comes much increase. So the farmer has two options. He can have a clean stable without, animals pooing in it and doing everything else they do, filthy animals, or he can have a productive farm. In order to have the farm productive, he's going to have a stable for those animals, and occasionally he's going to have to clean it up himself when it gets unbearably unhygienic, because ox or any other beast of burden has no sense of hygiene, but they are tremendously strong creatures, the strongest of all the beasts. And a little known fact of trivia is that Ephraim, the tribe from whose loins Joseph sprang, the most prominent one in the northern kingdom of Israel, was likened symbolically to the ox. And ox are the source of much increase. That means you will reap, your seeds that you plant will multiply, because the ox alone is sufficiently strong to till the toil of the land to give you that increase and abundant harvest. A trustworthy witness does not lie, but a false witness breathes out lies. these are so seemingly self-evident, I almost question whether it's appropriate for me to give any additional elaboration or explanation. But as to that, the fact that a lot of Proverbs are so simple and self-evident, if you read them in isolation, you would question to what extent the book belongs in the genre and category of wisdom literature. But we take these things for granted. But Solomon, from the plenary whole, reading the whole book of Proverbs, he has many wiser sayings perhaps than this one, and he was able to balance common sense with uncommon wisdom. So he had that rare, delicate balance, which this book brilliantly encapsulates. A scoffer shall seek wisdom, but is unable, but knowledge is swift to him who has understanding. So knowledge is swift to him who has understanding, because they have the foundation upon which additional items of information and knowledge can be built on and added to the pre-existent layers. But a scoffer, eventually they scoff at wisdom, and eventually they're going to long for it, but they're not going to have the resources or the aptitude or the ability to find it. So it's going to elude them because they are scoffers, where it's going to be attained and amalgamated and ingested into the mind of the one who is already knowledgeable by inclination and character. So scoffers are those who, alternately translated as mockers, are those who treat what is significant trivially and treat that which is trivial significantly. They have their priorities all mixed up and all backwards and all the rest. Leave the presence of a foolish man, for you shall not perceive the lips of knowledge. Now this one is not an antithetical one, so all the ones we've already read have a contrast. Usually the word but, I think, appears in every single one of them, so that indicates the contrast. But here the word is for, so this completes a sentence rather than compares and contrasts two outlooks and two outcomes. Leave the presence of a foolish man, because they do foolish things, they say stupid stuff, they have no value, and they have a corrupt, polluting presence. No good can come from associating or affiliating with a foolish person. They are to be avoided like the plague, and don't even share your nuggets of wisdom. In the New Testament, we are admonished not to cast our pearls before swine, so we must be careful to whom we dispense our nuggets of wisdom to, and so there's no reason to be intermixing or intermingling with foolish people if you are wise. The wisdom of the clever is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. So a wise person knows not only what he's doing, why he's doing it, how he's doing it, where he's doing it, when he's doing it, et al., etc. He understands, he is clever in seeking the understanding. Understanding is the lesser tier building block of wisdom. I think it's understanding knowledge than wisdom, so they're all connected. They're all not parallel, but synonymous, shall we say. But they know what they're doing, why they're doing it, what they're saying. They say what they mean what they say. They know what they mean, they know what they say. But foolishness, by its very nature, is deceitful, because fools have little use or regard for the truth, and they invite their own self-deceit, and they also invite deliberately deceitful influences to proliferate their minds. Fools scoff at guilt, but among the straight there is delight. So a scoffer, once more, is one who treats trivially that which demands to be treated significantly, and guilt is to the conscience what pain is to the body. We should be weeping and mourning over our sin, and we deserve the guilt which comes from sin, at least until it's unforgiven. We have to ask either the person or the Father for forgiveness and receive their assurance, and until that time, the guilt will linger, but the fool will mock the very idea or existence of guilt. They have no guilty conscience because they are not aware of having a conscience at all. And but the straight actually takes delight in guilt, and they recognize it as a necessary growing pang, without which they could not mature and develop to more than the sum of their own parts. The heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy. So the heart knows what affects it. When you are bitter, that is a heart problem, and at the heart of every problem is the problem of the heart. And bitterness is just to harbor, in a personal context, it harbors resentment against people or certain groups of people for a past slight, and you become bitter when you dwell on it. So there's no reason for a born-again believer to be defined by bitterness. It's okay as a momentary lapse, but to be defined by bitterness, there's to be none of that in the Christian life. And of course, joy we define differently from happiness. Joy is permanent and everlasting. We can find joy, we Christians can find joy even in the midst of our trials and our persecutions, whereas happiness is fleeting. So, but they are synonymous terms, and they are the translation is legitimate. But the house of the wicked is destroyed, but the tent of the straight flourishes. So a house is a qualitatively more substantial structure of home than a tent. But if it belongs to the wicked, it's going to be destroyed, it's going to be repossessed, or in some way it's going to slip from their hands, or they're going to light it on fire just because they're wicked, or they invite wicked retaliation. But the tent of the straight, even though it's a flimsier physical material, it will flourish and provide the shelter for the straight who deserves the shelter, whereas the wicked, they're skilled and creative and covetous in the items of the world, but they ultimately approach it with a destructive attitude, self-destructive. And there is a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. So this is a verse that is repeated verbatim in 1625, and man as their own guide is unreliable. The human heart is, in the diagnosis of the prophet Jeremiah, deceitful and desperately wicked. And because it is so wicked, it will deceive ourselves into thinking that the way we are following is the right thing. We will follow wrong and think we are doing right, all the way off the deep end of a shark-infested cliff. So the following your own self and creating your own system of morals and worshiping a God of your own manufacturing, one you can control, or just eliminating God all out of the picture, there are consequences for that, and it is death. So if you follow yourself, if you suffer from delusions of self-autonomy and think that God is not necessary, you are walking to your sure and sudden one day death, but inevitable nonetheless. Even in the laughter, the heart is in pain, and the end of that joy is heaviness. So this spans the full range of human emotions, and it goes through the cycle. So laughter, the same heart which laughs, is also housed in the same source of pain. So even though we are able to experience diametrically opposite emotions, such as laughter and pain, and joy is heaviness. Now, there's such a thing as laughing too much, and then there's a reason why comedians are depressed people. It's because they spend all their time bringing joy to others, and often at their own expense, and it catches up to them. So a lot of these funny figures we see on the TV screens and the stage are not who they seem outside of the persona they've sort of crafted for themselves on screen. The backslider in heart is satisfied with his own ways, but a good man from above. So the backslider, that's just someone who's repenting in the wrong direction. They are sliding back to their own ways and not even knowing or caring it. And they're going to be satisfied with his own ways, and the way which seems right to a man is death, as we have already read. So this is the course of action of the backslider. They will, they'll be delighted and satisfied and content to rely on their own judgment and own value and determine their own value. But a good man seeks the esteem and approval from above, not around. And verse 14 also marks the beginning of, so what we just read of the backslider, we're going to read of the simple, a fool, and an impatient person, and a simple person, and an evil one, and a poor person, and also an antithetical contrast, but we got to do it as concisely as possible at this point. Verse 15, the simple believes every word, but the clever one watches his step. One of the characteristics of simplicity is the lack of discernment. You accept what you hear as true, and you have a gullibility. So belief in this sense, Christians are not called to a blind faith. We are called to determine our faith and refine it and really examine it. But the simple, there's a difference between faith and gullibility. So the simple is a gullible creature, easily manipulatable because they believe anything you tell them without examination, without rigorous scrutiny or anything else necessary to detect the error in your lie. But a clever one, you're dealing with a different creature here. They're going to be wise to their ways, and they watch their steps. They avoid the pitfalls and the snares and the traps of the world, which are literally all around them. They are in the world, but not of it. The wise fears and turns from evil, but a fool rushes on and is reckless. So fear and recklessness. Now, as I've defined recently, I don't know if it was even the Proverbs series. Oh yeah, it was a rash word, whichever chapter that comes from. But rashness, courage is the golden mean between cowardice and rashness. So reckless too. So reckless is a careless sort of courage. It just goes ahead for the sake of going ahead, and whereas courage is not the absence of fear, but it is the confronting of fear intelligently and righteously. So the wise will, fear is not sinful. It is alternately a natural response to a real and present danger, or an imaginary response to a perceived danger. But the wise will know the difference. They will know the destructive potential of evil, and they will fear it and stay away from it. They will flee from its presence, whereas the fool, lacking that trait of discernment, will rush in, get lost, and ultimately lead their own way to their sure and sudden destruction. He who is impatient acts foolishly, and a man who plans wickedness is hated. So these are two types of people you don't want to be. This is not exactly an antithetical, because these are character defects. So impatient, the Christian life demands patience. That's an aspect of endurance. We have to patiently bear the trials and tribulations which come our way. We have to pray for the kingdom to come while bringing what we can of the kingdom to come. That desires an endurance, which often taxes our patience. But the impatient person, they're going to act foolishly. They're going to, because they don't have the patience to assess a certain situation and examine and arrive at the correct decision through critical thought process. And a man who plans wickedness is hated. How could you not hate someone who actually sits down and schemes and devises and desires and conspires to bring out evil plans and evil schemes? There's just no trait of likability or reason or right to respect such a person. The simple inherit folly, but the clever are crowned with knowledge. So the simple, that there once more simplicity, simple mindedness. To be simple is to lack the balancing trait of discernment with your belief, and that they're destined to live in folly and follow folly to its destructive end. But the wise are the clever ones. They wear knowledge like a crown. Knowledge is an item of biological royalty, which we can wear, not a literal crown, but we can establish our intellectually royal presence in any room through our wisdom. Where were we? The evil ones shall bow before the good, and the wicked ones at the gate of the righteous. So this is not quite an antithetical once more, because we read the word and. So that marks the signal on completion. And of course, this is not, as we elaborated earlier, once before, I believe in the preamble, this is not, Proverbs are not promises, they are principles. So of course, much in the world, good people bow before wicked and evil men. They are submitted to rulers who are under the control and the influence of the evil ones, and the good are forced to suffer under their tyranny. And the gates would have been an ancient city, but in this day and age, this is a principle and a future promise. So in the kingdom which comes, the evil one shall bow down before the good, because we will be co-reigning and co-judging as a privilege of our elect status in that blessed day. Final verse, verse 20. The poor is hated even by his own neighbor, but the rich has many friends. So no one likes a poor person, including poor people. They despise the fact that they live in a shabby house next to your shabby house, and they're not going to like you because you have nothing to offer them, that you are as limited in resources as they are. I guess the trait of neighborly love is a lot more challenging to cultivate in a ghetto or a slum. But the poor, the rich has many friends. Now the challenge of having many friends is differentiating between the ones who are there for your wealth, or the ones who are genuinely friendly and they genuinely enjoy your company and are sincere in their professions of friendship. So with rich comes many friends. I would personally apostrophize the word in my own interpretation, because friends are few and far in between, and everyone's going to pretend to be your friend when you have all the money in the world. And that's not our goal in life. That's certainly not my goal in life. So I hope that's the reason you're here. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.